I suppose that's students.
I think I'm the elder here, and because you and Adeline are very new, very young.
Oh, well, that's not what my children tell me.
Thank you for
Really? Nicolas, pode falar.
we are currently live
I
now.
suppose that's students.
Okay, have started then.
Okay, thanks, Nicolas.
I think I'm the elder here, and because you and Adeline are very new, very young.
But
Oh, well, that's not what my children tell me.
can I begin now?
Yes, you can start. Pode começar. Nicolas, pode falar.
We are currently live now. Okay, a moment. Okay, thanks, Nicolas. Okay, let's go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the virtual channel of the graduate program in food science at Pharmacy School of Federal University of Bahia. Today, October 25, we will be streamed by conference with great honor the lecture integration of consumer demand in the development of novel foods from the point of view of food scientists, which will be given by Professor Nicolas Bordenave, is correct? At the invitation of the Professor Nelson Collaut, coordinator of the discipline Topics in Food Science of the graduate program in food science. And Dario, you will lead this event. In this sense, I would like to agree and thank Professor Nicolas Bordenave again for accepting the invitation of Professor Nelson for this conference. In addition, thank you also everyone who are following us in live broadcast on the YouTube channel. Professor Nelson, please.
Thank you, Professor Adeline. I'm Professor Nelson Collaut. I'm responsible for the course of Topics and Food Science from the graduate program in food science of the Federal University of Bahia. This is a part of the Institutional Internationalization Initiative. Here we have the pleasure to have Nicolas Bordenave. Nicolas Bordenave is professor, is associate professor from the School of Nutrition Science from the University of Ottawa, Canada. And he will give us a lecture about integration of consumers' demands and the development of novel foods from the point of view of food scientists. Professor Nicolas, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope you can still hear me well. All good? Yes. Okay, good. So I'll start sharing my screen with you, and okay, I'll just wait for your confirmation that you can see my screen well. Yes, okay. Looks like a yes. Okay. Excellent, perfect. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. We had a chat with Professor Collauto a while ago, and we realized that maybe sometimes I speak too fast, and that's what my students always tell me anyway. So if there's any problem with that, don't hesitate to raise your hand and tell me to slow down, and I'll do my best for that. I will start because I don't know you. You probably don't know me, and so I'll start by a very brief presentation for today's presentation, just about from where I talk, so that at least you know a little bit about at least that situation. So currently at the University of Ottawa. It's a bit hard to see, but if you see Canada here, Ottawa is just right here between Montreal and Toronto. It's the federal capital of Canada. It has a population of 1 million people. It's rather small, actually, but it's got a lot to offer. It's the University of Ottawa has 42,000 students, 1,200 researchers, so it's a quite nice university. There are some things about Canada that maybe you'd like to know. I don't know, but it's always nice for me to share that. The average temperature during the day in summer is 27 degrees. The average temperature in the night in winter is -14. We've got quite a span of temperature, but it makes doesn't make life challenging. It's quite nice, and we've got about 180 meters of not 180, 180 centimeters of snow every year. And just to finish with that, Ottawa is proud to have the world's longest ice rink in the world. It's actually a canal that is frozen in winter and where people just go ice skating. I don't know if there are a lot of opportunities for ice skating where you are. For us, every winter is ice skating opportunity.
No, hardly.
So, yeah, that's what I thought. All right. So before really starting this presentation, I would like to thank you, Nelson, for the invitation, and I would like also to recognize the students who helped me with the work that I will present to you and the topic. We've been working on that topic for a little while, and some graduate and undergraduate students helped, and they did a great job. And what you'll see and hear is mostly a product of their work, and also the funding agencies where we got funding for this work. So that being said, we'll talk about novel foods. And as you probably know, there are many food trends that you can see. Maybe you have heard of the paleo diet, or plant-based diet. So that's probably the most common. Gluten-free diet, ketogenic diet, whatever diet and whatever food goes with it. I don't know what is the situation in Brazil, but in Canada, cannabis is legal, so there's plenty of foods that are developed with cannabis inside, and so all that is part of the development of novel food products. But what is interesting to see is that they're mostly, if not all, related to health and environment. And there's one concept that is overarching that. It's the concept of clean label. Clean label is the type of food that has simple, natural, recognizable ingredients, and that supports clean and healthy living, whatever that means. And we'll come back to that, because that's one of the main points of understanding what that means, supporting clean and healthy living. So if you look at all these diets, paleo diets, plant-based, gluten-free, ketogenic, whatever you want, functional foods, it all revolves around that. And I think this is a great opportunity to exercise a bit of critical thinking, looking at these trends and novel foods, but through the lens of science, and ask that question. Okay, we've got these trends, but what does the science say about it? And can we have a little bit of critical thinking about that? And that's what we'll try to achieve today. So we'll start with a bit of history. And I think it's important because food doesn't come from nowhere, and maybe a little bit of history will be helpful to understand what is clean label. And so I will not go back to a long time ago, probably just maybe 2 centuries ago, where there were major scientific breakthroughs in the late 18th, early 19th century, and the appearance of modern chemistry. What the person you can see here, it was a French chemist, Antoine de Lavoisier, who pretty much invented modern chemistry, and that led to new concepts about food. Before that, food was not produced at the industrial scale, and food was not really understood for what it was in terms of composition. But chemistry just appeared at that time. And so it led to a novel understanding of food, their composition, and even adulteration. And what you can see here is a picture that was published in a journal in New York in the 1850s about the New York swill milk scandal. And so, for those who may not know that, there was an issue with milk in New York in these years, 1850s, because milk, the producers of milk wanted to make more money. There was a bit of a shortage of milk, and they wanted to make more money. So first they diluted the milk with water, but it didn't taste like milk. So they started to add different components. They started to add flour. They started to add dust. They started to add things so that it would look like milk, taste like milk, but actually it was no longer milk. And at some points, people started to be poisoned by that. And that kind of things started to be understood thanks to the appearance of modern chemistry. Then there could be a relationship between what was in the food, what were the contaminants, and what could be the effects on health. So there was the emergence of a new scientific notion of purity of food in relation with safety, and that led to new regulations. This is an example of these new regulations that happened in 1875 in England. It was the Sale of Food and Drugs Act. And so this is just one example that happened in England, but the same happened in many countries. But what it says is that this act, this law, was aimed to repeal adulteration of food and make better provision for the sale of food and drugs in a pure state, meaning that it was a law that was saying if you want to sell food, it's got to be pure and free from contaminations. And that appeared from the developments of chemistry at that time. And quickly, it became an argument for selling food. See, these you probably know the brand Heinz, the maker of ketchup, but at the time they were also selling vinegar, and their advertisement was saying, "Are you sure your vinegar is pure?" It became a selling point. For example, in this case, we Heinz sell pure vinegar. There's nothing else. There's no adulteration. We don't add anything. It's pure in the chemical sense. And that appeared towards the end of the 19th century. So you can probably understand at that point that there was that chemical understanding of clean food, food that was pure, that was not contaminated with anything. And that's the first aspect of clean food. But there's another aspect of clean food, and it's more of a moral perspective, I would say. These are just pictures that may represent different religions, but the message here is that there are a lot of ancient traditional food prescriptions of norms of what food is appropriate or inappropriate. You can see them in religions, but you can see them also in very old traditions about what you can eat, what you cannot eat, what is pure and impure. And it's interesting to see that here we are it's different from what we were saying about the chemistry of food, about pure or not pure from a chemistry standpoint. It's more from a moral perspective. What is pure, not pure, appropriate or inappropriate? And what I will show you now is how these two things, the scientific concept and the moral concept, merged progressively until it became clean, clean label foods, if you will, at this stage. So, as I was telling you, there were these traditional food prescriptions, and that changed progressively during the 19th century with some, I would say, new ways of thinking. There were what was called the clean living movements in the States, or hygienism in France. You can see here Sylvester Graham, that was an American person who was encouraging vegetarianism. For him, clean living was living by the abiding by the law of nature, doing exercise, being respectful of nature, and not eating animals, being vegetarian. And so for him, that was that first notion of clean food. And you can see that it starts to merge with the scientific approach of that. And it went more and more into the food and the diet. It became clean eating and naturalness of the food. And so you can see that maybe you know that saying, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. I wouldn't dare to say it in Portuguese. I've put it here. Um, maybe if someone knows how to say it, I don't. I'm sorry, I don't speak. I don't speak Portuguese. But does that ring a bell?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Que o alimento seja seu remédio seja o seu alimento. Perfect.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And that quote was attributed to Hippocrates, the first the Greek doctor who kind of formalized medicine in his time. And well, actually, the very interesting thing is that this quote is false. Hippocrates never said that. It was shown by a Colombian researcher who showed that Hippocrates never said that. And historically, it was actually a construction. It was journalists in 1921 who started to talk about food and clean living and health and all that kind of things, and started to write about that until progressively it became that quote that actually was not from Hippocrates. But what is really interesting, it's that it appeared um, at the end of that process of long traditions about food that is pure or impure, and new understanding of purity from a chemical standpoint. And then suddenly people wanted to have pure food, but pure from a overall perspective. And so started to think about let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food, so much so that they invented that quote. Um, and so these kind of things came back over and over again, and you can see, so that was a paper about the regular resurgence of new clean living movements in the States, and that kind of things, top clean eating recipes. These things come back again and again. So clean food, clean label is nothing new, actually. It's new as a concept in the food that we eat. It's I'll go back to that slide here. It's new from that perspective that it turns into novel diets, novel food. But actually, what I wanted to show you is that it's nothing really new, and it's deeply rooted in our minds. First, from a moral perspective, and secondly, from a scientific perspective as well. So this is where we are. This is a bit of a historical perspective on clean label food and what it is. Now, the question is, why does it resonate with us a lot? And when I say us, um, in your vast majority, I suppose you are students studying food science. Your professors do that as well. I do food science, but we are also consumers because we buy and eat food every day. So it resonates with us, and I'll get back to that in a few minutes. But what I will try to look at now is um, why clean label became so important for consumers. And so the first reason is a lack of trust in safety. Uh, in general, for new food ingredients or new foods to be accepted, the risk they pose have to be assessed. And this is a brief overview about how in general, regulatory bodies assess the risk of a new food or a new ingredient. So the first thing is hazard assessment. Is there anything that could be hazardous with the food? Can it create allergies? Can it create some sickness or whatever? Then the risk characterization. Is that risk important? And there are two dimensions for that, meaning if that hazard happens, will it create a lot of damage or a little damage? And what is the likelihood of that hazard happening? Is it very likely or unlikely? And so you can see that it creates conditions of characterizing the risk. A hazard that creates a lot of damage and that is very likely, that's something you don't want in your food. Something that creates little to no damage and that's on top of it very unlikely, that's all right. And that's based on this type of reasoning that regulatory bodies say if a food is safe for commercialization or not. And then the following steps are about risk management. If anything wrong happens, what do we do? And risk communication. What do we say to consumers? And there are different issues in that risk assessment. The first problem is the methods of characterization. How do we characterize a hazard with new food or new ingredient? For example, you may use cell culture or animal models to test the effects of a food, but you can't really test it on humans. So what can we say about that? It's also generally when you test that, it's also you test it over maybe a few days, at most a few months. But what will happen if you eat that food for several years, or 20 years, or 30 years? There is no way of assessing that kind of hazard. And so that creates uncertainty. And for consumers, that creates anxiety. And how do I know that this novel food will be safe for me if I eat it every day for the next 30 years? I don't know that, and there's no way of saying it. So it creates a bit of anxiety from the consumer's perspective. There's also the issue of risk communication. And very often, communication emphasizes a lot the hazard piece. For example, there was that paper that was published by John Ioannidis from Stanford University. And the title was, I think it was really funny, Is Everything We Eat Associated with Cancer? What he did was to collect a lot of scientific papers making the connection between food and cancer and saying, is that really true that that all of these ingredients, sometimes very common ingredients, are associated with cancer? And he did a meta-analysis of that, and his result was that no, in the end, there's pretty much no risk. And this is very critical because what his conclusion was there is almost no risk, which is in this part, whereas these studies were talking about the hazard. There is maybe a possibility that some food ingredients create cancer, right? This is a hazard. But is this a real risk? Well, actually, this analysis says no. The possibility exists, but it's extremely unlikely. And if you group all the studies together, the answer is very likely to be no. There is no risk. But the thing is that when consumers read these kind of studies, I don't know, sugar related with cancer or glutamate related with cancer. In the end, if we look at things in detail, well, maybe it's not that that concerning. But what consumers remember in their head is that possible link between the two, and what they remember is the hazard and not the risk. So that contributes to the lack of trust in safety. And the last one is about risk characterization. When there is a regulatory body that looks at risk characterization, and that's what I was telling you about, is the risk important or not? Can that ingredient, for example, create a lot of damage or little damage? Is it very likely or unlikely? And so the reasoning is based on a judgment on acceptable risk. The regulatory body, for example, the FDA in the States, and I'm sorry, I don't know the name of that regulatory in Brazil, but there is a regulatory body in Brazil as well that says, yes, we can go ahead with that food or not. Well, it's a judgment of what is acceptable as a risk or not. It's the role of the expert, but it goes against the perception of consumers. And I think that the title of that book says a lot. How safe is safe enough? For example, the regulatory bodies will say it's 99% safe. But as a consumer, I would say, I don't want to take that 1% risk. And what do we do with it? And so it creates also a lack of trust in safety, because the consumers would tend to think, well, safe may not be safe enough, and we don't really know what's going to happen with new foods or new ingredients or that kind of things. So there is that thing about the lack of trust that contributes to consumers wanting clean label, things that they see that are familiar and that they recognize. And then it turns into how to choose foods or ingredients, and that's what is called neophobia. It's the fear of the unfamiliar. These are the results of a survey that was done by a major ingredient company that's called Ingredient, and what they were asking to consumers is, what kind of ingredients do I recognize, and what kind of ingredients I accept in my food? And so you'll see that it's very interesting. In that top thing here, in that green rectangle, it's the ingredients that are mostly familiar or trusted. So, for example, sugar is trusted, oil is trusted, natural colors, natural flavors, starch, gelatin. These things are recognized and accepted. You can see them here. People are okay to have that in their food. But at the bottom of it, it's all the things that people don't recognize. And generally, it's interesting to see that it's got names that don't resonate with consumers. They call it weird, unknown, artificial, unnatural, chemical. You can see, for example, hydroxypropyl methylcellulose, or carboxymethylcellulose, or xanthan gum. And these things that are not recognized are also not accepted. Because people don't know that, because people fear that, then they don't want them in their food. Interestingly, we got the artificial colors and artificial flavors. They are recognized because there's the term artificial in the name, but they're not accepted. So you can see that, in order to make a choice that would reduce uncertainty and anxiety, consumers will turn to ingredients they know, to ingredients that are familiar. And so they tend to favor ingredients in food that are made of these kind of ingredients: simple, natural, and recognizable. There are things that are interesting because sometimes it's paradoxical. As food scientists yourselves, you may know that guar gum, for example, is just an extract of a seed. That xanthan gum is a polysaccharide that is produced by a bacteria. So these are perfectly natural. From a scientific standpoint, there's no reason to be afraid of that. But consumers don't recognize it and therefore don't want it. It's interesting also to see, for example, that tapioca starch that you can see here is not recognized and therefore is not accepted. Whereas, for example, cornstarch ranks up. It is being recognized and it is being accepted, and starch alone is being accepted as well. It's just because, and so that was done in Europe. It's because the Europeans don't recognize the word tapioca, then they just say, I'll stay away from that. I don't want it. I don't know it, so I don't want it. And these are the kind of drivers that go through the clean label food. And finally, the last point that drives clean label is misinformation on internet and social media. There's a lot of things going around. You are much younger than me, so you probably know that much better than me. My daughter is 14 years old, and she told me that I'm old because I use Facebook, but well, so maybe you know better. But you can probably see a lot of wrong things going around on the internet. This is just one example of something I've seen. Don't eat egg yolks. Don't eat that yellow part. Why that? There's misinformation about that, and it influences consumers' behavior. And so if you put all the pieces together, you probably start to understand why there's clean label. And I'll try to show you these pieces together. So, why clean label? Because there's a lot of different foods, a lot of different food innovations that are coming on the market. There are moral norms about what is appropriate or not appropriate to eat. And there's complex and conflicting information about health and safety. What is really helpful? What is really healthy? What is really safe? And so for consumers, it creates uncertainty. And when there is uncertainty, every consumer has to find a way, to find their way through uncertainty. There is uncertainty, but still, at the end of the day, you still have to eat. So in the middle of that uncertainty, how do you choose your food? And this is where clean label comes. It is a way of choosing. It is a simple criteria for choosing. That kind of simple criteria, this is what is called a heuristic. A heuristic is a simplification just to get more quickly to the right choice. So that heuristic is natural is better. I only trust familiar ingredients, or I only trust if there are few ingredients. And what consumers expect is that if they choose natural ingredients, only familiar ingredients, only a few ingredients and not too much, then what they will choose will be safe, healthful, and responsible food choices. That's the expected outcome, and that is the essence of clean label, right? Among all these diets, um, it's hard to find your way. So to make it simpler, consumers will say, well, I'll go for natural, recognizable ingredients, only a few of them, and this way I'll try to make sure that I make the right choices for me, my safety, and my health. But what we'll try to do now is what I was telling you at the beginning. Try to exercise a bit of critical thinking about what all that means in terms of novel foods. So I'll just take a quick break. I wonder if there are questions at this stage, or if I'm speaking too fast. Is there anything? Is that all right in terms of speed, and is that okay in terms of content? All good for now?
Seems to be right. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So let's keep going. So now the question is that simplification, that heuristic about clean label, choosing clean label foods as a way to choose healthy and safe foods. Does that really work? Another way to put the question is it an effective heuristic? Is that a good criteria for choices? And the first thing I would like to show you is label confusion and perception. The question being, what is clean, healthful, and safe? And consumers make a lot of inferences about what is clean and from what they see on the package of their food. If they see natural, they think healthy. If they see organic, to them it means healthy. But organic, natural, clean label, it's actually not really the same. And I'll go a bit into the details here. Organic is only an agricultural practice. It means that there's no pesticides. I'm making it more simple, but it means essentially that there's no pesticides in the way the food was grown. So does that mean there cannot be synthetic ingredients? Not at all. There can be synthetic ingredients in organic food. So does that solve the issue? Not really. So you see that organic food, on the one hand, it can mean healthy for consumers, but at the same time, it's not really fitting the bill because there can be some ingredients that consumer may not want after all. It's the same thing for natural. There was a ruling from the FDA in the States that was saying a natural food is where nothing artificial or synthetic has been included in the food that would not normally be expected to be in that food. So essentially nothing artificial or synthetic in that food. But does that mean that the food will not contain pesticides or fertilizers, for example, just like organic food? Well, not at all. It just means that there's nothing artificial or synthetic in the food. So possibly it could contain the pesticides or fertilizers that were not in the organic food. So once again, natural could mean safe for consumers, but if you look at what natural means, well, it's not exactly there yet. And the third one is clean label. And what does it mean? Well, there's no definition. People generally choose, they think organic is some kind of clean label, but it's not really it because there can be synthetic ingredients in organic foods. They think of natural also as being clean label, but it's not really helpful because there can be traces of pesticides and fertilizers in natural food. So there's a lot of confusion. People tend to associate organic, natural, clean label with healthy and safe. And when you look at that in detail, well, it's not quite there yet. There's nothing that really captures the whole thing. Another aspect is about what is healthful and safe. And it's interesting to see that having, for example, organic food creates a halo of healthfulness. I, with my students here in Ottawa, I always take that example that an organic pizza or an organic burger is still a pizza and still a burger. In terms of calories and fat, it's still the same. You probably don't get the pesticides or fertilizers, but you get the calories from a pizza or burger. But the thing is that when you look at how consumers behave, they tend to think that organic is healthier, so they would tend to indulge more, eat more of that pizza, eat more of that burger, whereas they wouldn't necessarily do that if the food was not organic. So it means that organic being perceived as more healthful, it can lead to unhealthy behaviors, eating more than you would normally. And this has been shown by multiple studies. So clean label, in the sense of natural, organic, or clean, is not really helpful in that sense as well, in the sense that it can create unhealthy behaviors. There's also, so this was about the benefits of clean label, and there's also the aspect about the risks. For example, organic and natural are perceived as safer, but there can be external contaminants, so probably not for organic, but it's possibly the case for natural foods. Is that safer in terms of microbiological safety? No, because organic foods are about how you grow the food without fertilizers or without pesticides. But it doesn't say anything about how food is handled and how food is safe from a microbiological standpoint. So organic or natural doesn't mean safer from the standpoint of microbiology. Also, there's the role of synthetic ingredients. A lot of synthetic ingredients, I'm thinking, for example, of preservatives. People fear that at the individual level, not realizing the benefit at a collective level. Preservatives help keep food for longer, so it doesn't spoil too quickly. And if we don't use preservatives, then there would be a lot of food waste, and a lot of food waste is not good for the environment. So it's interesting to see that disconnection between consumers afraid of some preservatives, even though they can be quite safe, and so they tend to reject that kind of ingredients, and the collective benefit of using them, that is about, for example, reducing food waste. And so it's interesting to see that some of the drivers of clean label are actually disconnected from what can happen in the reality. And the last point is actually illustrated by that mushroom. There's that false perception that natural is safe. And sometimes my students are surprised by that when I tell them, well, there are some very natural molecules that are poisonous, like this mushroom. Natural doesn't mean safe. Even though, as I was telling you here, organic, natural, consumers tend to think, well, that means safe. Natural doesn't mean safe, and that mushroom is just the perfect example to prove that point. So, in a way, once again, having clean, organic, or natural food doesn't guarantee a choice that is healthy and safe. And I'll go again into more of these things that show that it's not a guarantee of being healthy and safe. For example, what is not on the label? Because people judge their food on the label, on the packaging. They look at the packaging and they have to make a split-second decision when they are in the grocery store about, is that food good for me or not? But it's only with the information on the label. And there are some things that are not on the label. For example, external contaminations. BPA, bisphenol A, is a molecule that is added, or that was added very often in packaging material, and that could migrate into the food. And it is now recognized as a toxic compound. But you could never see BPA on the label because it's not part of the food, it's part of the packaging. But it could migrate into the food. So it's actually a risk that exists, but that is not shown on the label and on the packaging. So you can choose your clean food, a clean label, or organic or natural, and still have that kind of contamination that can be dangerous, but that would never appear on the packaging. So once again, what I'm trying to show you is how that heuristic, that simple choice of going for clean label doesn't really work in the end for consumers. Here's another example of things that can happen in the food and that are not on the label. It's, for example, the toxic compounds that are generated in the food. When you grill meat, when you cook potatoes, for example, I'm thinking of advanced glycation end products or acrylamide. These are toxic compounds that are created in the food as it is processed. And so it's not an ingredient. Once again, if you make your choice, your food choice, based on the label and on the packaging, that doesn't appear because it's just a product of how food is processed. It's not an ingredient. It's not something that you add in the food. It's something that is created in the food, like acrylamide, for example, when you fry potatoes. So once again, that doesn't appear on the label, and so choosing clean label food doesn't protect you from that kind of things. And the last point would be about food processing. Food processing is the degree of processing of food can impact its health properties, health benefits. This is just an illustration, but this is the glycemic response of different oat products. So it's just only oats. And you can see that depending on how oats are processed, are transformed, then it's got a different effect on your glucose, blood glucose levels. It's a simple example, but it shows how you transform the food changes its properties. How you transform the food matrix, the physical state of your food, can change the way it is digested, it is absorbed, and therefore the effects on health. And that, again, is not something that appears on the label. So if you choose clean label or organic or natural, it doesn't say anything about food processing, whereas food processing can impact the health benefits and can undermine what you thought was healthy and safe. So the conclusion here is it really effective? What I told you earlier about consumers, they face a lot of food offerings, a lot of food innovations, and they've got moral norms about clean living, and they've got complex and conflicting information. So they try to make a choice by going for a clean label, and what they expect is a safe and healthful food choice. But what I just showed you is that actually, if you change the food matrix by processing, If you look at the toxic compounds that can be generated in the food, if you look at unsuspected contaminations like BPA, for example, or if you think about ingredient substitutions, for example, I'm thinking of acetic acid, for example. It's a preservative, and it scares consumers. And so some food companies have replaced acetic acid by vinegar, which is the same, but one looks clean label, the other one doesn't. Well, all that is really confusing for consumers, and it makes so that the choice of clean label doesn't work as well as they would have expected. It doesn't help making the optimal food choices as they were expecting. So to the question, is it a effective or ineffective heuristic way of choosing food? Clean label, I would say probably not. Sometimes it works, but most of the time it doesn't, because it cannot take into account everything that makes health and safety. So I'll almost wrap it up here with by putting it all together with the novel foods and all the paradoxes that it leads to. As I was telling you, consumers ultimately what consumers demand is health and safety, and they try to achieve that with clean label, and that doesn't really happen. For example, what I was telling you was the health halo from natural and organic formulations, but that could lead to counterproductive eating behaviors, eating more calories than people should, just because they think it's organic, it's natural, it must be good for me, so I can go with it. And this is a product that is commercialized in Canada, and on the front of the package you will see that good for your body, good for the planet, no preservatives, no artificial ingredients, what else? Organic, non-GMO, vegan, whatever you want. But if you look at that here, and 21 grams, 120 calories, it means more than 500 calories for 100 grams. It's a very, very, very rich food that if you overindulge, well, it can be a problem for your health. But because consumers will first see that no preservative, no artificial ingredient, good for your body, good for the planet, then it can be confusing and can lead to overeating, that kind of things, and it can be counterproductive. So that would be one of the problems of developing new foods in that space of clean label. Another thing is plant-based foods. And plant-based foods, and I'm thinking particularly of that kind of products, Beyond Meat and the vegetarian burger. To be able to look like meat, it requires ultra transformation, ultra formulation. So on the one hand, it attracts consumers because it's plant-based, it's probably organic as well, it's clean. If you look at just the front of the package, it falls under the definition of clean label. But if you look at the list of ingredients, then it really is part of the ultra transformed, ultra processed foods. See, with all the additives and all the formulation. So, and as you may know, ultra transformed, ultra processed foods are associated with higher risk of chronic diseases. So if you put yourself in the shoes of consumers, they would probably go for that kind of product, thinking that it's clean, I can go with it, whereas it's still ultra processed food that is not wrong in itself, but should be consumed just moderately, just like other ultra-processed foods. And that is blurred by the clean label appearance. And the last example I will show you is that one about only apparently satisfying ingredient substitutions. As you may know as well, nitrites that you can see here on the label nitrites are now put into question. They are associated with higher risk of chronic diseases. And so that brand just say, okay, we'll make bacon with no nitrate or nitrite added. We haven't added that ingredient that is nitrate or nitrite. But what really happens? They add cultured celery powder. And what is cultured celery powder? Celery contains a lot of nitrate. And by being fermented, that nitrate is converted into nitrite. So by adding cultured celery powder, you're actually adding nitrite to the bacon. And so you say no nitrate or nitrite added, whereas you add nitrates and nitrites through the cultured celery powder. So for a consumer, that would look like clean label, trustworthy, good for my health, whereas it's actually exactly the same. There are nitrates and nitrites. So it's only apparent. It's only a matter of packaging and communication. And so that's all around that development of new foods under the clean label trend. So I'm almost done with that presentation, and I would like to conclude with what can we do, and I would even say what can you do as future food professional of the food, and that is something that is important. So if you know that quote from Oscar Wilde, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder," well, I would say that cleanliness of a food is in the eye of a consumer. Only the consumer will judge if a certain food is clean enough for them or not. But that is actually very confusing because there's paradoxical and contradictory demands. It's driven by moral considerations and stereotypes and amplified by misinformation. Sometimes it can be counterproductive. I told you with excessive calories, and it can be harmful for the industry as well. I'll just come back to that. You know, when consumers realize that cultured celery powder is actually nitrates and nitrites that they are told are not added, then it will hurt again the trust that people have in the industry. So that's a problem at many levels. So what can we do? What can you do as future food professionals? How about information? To share or not to share? That is a difficult question because sharing information, sharing knowledge is never really a bad thing. But who can really understand all the knowledge about food science? It's very hard. And the more you share, healthy and safe to consumers. And with that, this is the end of the presentation. I hope that wasn't, and I can answer any question that you may have.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, Professor Bordenave. It was brilliant, and you have to think a lot before eating every day. That is each day more difficult. Anyway, we are open for questions. Please raise your hand or just start talking. Celie, please, you can start.
Teacher, congratulations on your presentation. I work in organic chocolate factory, certified for USA, Europe, and Brazil. Your products are gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegan, kosher, halal. Your packing is compostable. I use it to consider your products clean label, but now I have doubts. No, we have hazard analysis and control points in place, but how could we consider the risks the consumers perception?
Thank you for the question. It's a very interesting one, and I think um, I precisely I leave that slide here just to show you that that cleanliness is in the eyes of the consumer. That it means that only your consumers can tell you if they consider your product as clean for them or not. And it will probably depend on the type of product. If it's chocolate, clean chocolate, yes, clean chocolate will, will probably be different for consumers compared to, I don't know, clean pizza or whatever, because the people who are likely to buy that chocolate are um, a type of consumers that have thoughts, feelings that may be different from others. It depends also on the country. So, and that's what I wanted to mean in the end. Understanding your consumers is important. In this case, what do the consumers of your product think, and what is important for them to consider that food as clean? What will make that food? What will make them think it is safe? What will make them think it is healthy? Will make them think it is sustainable? That will depend on the products. That will depend on the consumers. So it's really, product by product, and only asking the consumers can give you the answer, I think.
Okay.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And Luciana Lodelo, your question.
Okay, can you hear me well?
Excellent.
Okay, so I was thinking about how do you see the future with 3D food printing? I mean, it's a clean technology. However, the acceptance of people may be low due to the fact that it's synthetic. So how do you see that?
Again, that's a very good question. I would say it's essentially a matter of perception. Generally speaking, new technologies, I would say that consumers are afraid of new technologies. And there are plenty of studies showing that when you explain the new technologies to consumers, they are more likely to accept it. Now, that being said, if you look at 3D printed foods, it will likely fall into the category of ultra processed foods. And there is more and more data showing that the more you eat ultra processed foods, the more likely you are to have health issues, to put it simply. So that is a fine line to walk, because if you consider 3D printed foods as ultra processed foods, it will be a problem of perception for consumers. But at the same time, it can be a very novel food that will create new offerings for consumers, and that can be exciting. So there may be a challenge about making 3D printed foods that will show health benefits, for example, rather than falling into the category of bad ultra processed foods. Sometimes it's just a matter of perception. Sometimes it's a matter of what ingredients you put in there. There can be a lot of factors playing into that, but I would say it's essentially a matter of perception. Getting people to accept 3D printed food as a novel technology is one thing, but having them accept 3D printed food as a healthy and safe food is another thing that may be even more difficult. So I don't have an answer to a real answer to your question, but what I'm trying to tell you is the different hurdles that there can be towards that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luciana. Agnes, is your question?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can you listen me?
Yep.
My name is Okay. My name is Agnes Sofia. Nice to meet you, Professor Nicolas Bordenave. I want to thank you for your time and your presentation to our class. And I want to ask neophobia is one of the significant barriers to accept novel food alternatives. What strategies can we apply to reduce discussion toward unfamiliar foods?
Oh, sir, there was a cut at the end of the question. What is the barrier to reduce what, sorry?
What strategies can we apply to reduce disgusting toward unfamiliar foods?
That's a difficult one. What strategies? And you know, just like any, you know, it is difficult because it is interesting. It's with everything that is novel. Actually, I think we have the same challenges. How to make it acceptable for consumers, and in the end, I would say. It's partly in our hands and partly not. We can do our best to explain novel foods, novel technologies, and make them acceptable, but it will still depend on how consumers perceive that. But I would say that whatever the strategy that you may use, from my perspective, I would say that the most important thing is to avoid, I would say, lying to consumers. See that example that I gave you about. Sorry, I'm getting back to the slide. That example of of that bacon without nitrites. To me, that's close to a lie. And if consumers understand that, they will you will lose the trust of the consumers, and that can be very damaging to your brand, to your company. So I don't have any particular idea about a strategy to make novel foods more acceptable, because as we were saying, for 3D printed foods, for chocolates, it really depends on your consumers, the type of consumers, their country, their age, their gender, whatever you want. It depends on your product. So it's hard to give one answer to that. But the one thing to avoid is to lie to them, because when they realize, then you lose the trust forever, right? So it's probably the biggest trap, to try to hide things, to try to conceal things, and try to just to change nitrites or cultured celery powder instead of nitrites. Well, it may work for a little while, but not forever. And so if you want to avoid too much risk and damage for your product or your brand, then that's typically the kind of things to avoid, I would say. So I'm sorry, I don't have one answer for you. I cannot tell you what to do, but I can tell you what not to do.
Okay, thank you, but I can understand.
Okay, that's nice. Sibeli, it's your question. You can do it now.
It's on the chat, I think.
Okay, Sibeli has used the chat. Can you read it, Nicolas?
Yes, I can see it. So Anvisa launched a new labeling in Brazil for a short time. In it, it appears in letters a greater amount of sugar, fat, in fat, do you believe that this new labeling will help people better reflect on what they consume? So I don't know this specific labeling, but I know there's a trend about that. There's in Europe, there's the three colors, green, yellow, and red, depending on the nutritional profile. In Canada, there's a law that just passed that when there is too much sugar or too much fat, there will be a big red sign on the food, just to show that it's not nutritionally balanced. Can it help people make better choice? I think so, but it's always a bit difficult because there's always I would say, two opposing views. One saying, generally from the industry, saying, well, you know what, consumers are grown-ups, they're adults generally, and generally when you go shopping, you're an adult. So people are able to make their choices. We don't force them to eat anything. That kind of food, for example, with too much fat or too much sugar, it should be eaten only in moderation, not too often, not too much. But that is not our business. We just make the food and sell it, and it's on the consumers to have the right behavior. So that would be one view. But the other view being, we know that consumers don't know everything. We know that consumers don't necessarily control their behaviors. So maybe there should be some regulations to help them make better choices. And this is typically the case. But again, you could say, well, how can a government or regulatory body tell people what to eat or not to eat? It's always a difficult thing. So I wouldn't have a definitive answer to that, but these are the two things that are opposed generally. You have, as a consumer, the freedom of choice, but we know that in reality, you're influenced by your behaviors, by advertisement. And so to what extent shall we help you make the right choices? But after all, what is the right choice? If I choose to eat chips all day long, well, it could be my choice. And so, what I mean by that is it's a legitimate attempt to help consumers, but it's got limitations, because at some point, you will find people who will say, well, anyway, I eat whatever I want. And the industry saying, I can produce whatever I want and I don't force anyone to buy and eat it. So, again, I know that must be frustrating because I ask more questions than I give answers, but this is what you will encounter in the end, these opposing views, and where does the needle go towards more freedom or more regulation will probably depend on the country, will depend on the culture, but there's no right or wrong answer there. It's only a difficult, it's only a difficult one, because as a regulatory body, as a government, you'd like to protect the health of your people. As an industry, you'd like to make profit and sell more products. So where to go with that? But I would add one final point on this one, which can be interesting. We have seen a shift in the food industry, and I'm thinking of big food companies. Before being at the University of Ottawa, I was working for PepsiCo. I worked for 6 years at PepsiCo, and I saw that at the time, the CEO of the company, and there was also the CEO of Unilever, who had the same reasoning, saying, if we keep feeding people with unhealthy food, the overall health of the people on the planet will go worse. And in the end, who will be blamed for that, it will be us, food companies. So if we want our business to be sustainable for a very long time, then it's also our responsibility to make healthier foods. So these companies, and I think that Mars was doing the same thing. They were saying, okay, we produce food that is, we know that it's not really healthy. We know it's fun and you shouldn't eat it too much, but we also produce more healthy food that can become part of your choice. And then we offer all that, healthy, unhealthy, and it makes it easier for consumers to make healthy choices rather than having just unhealthy stuff. So the idea of sustainable business, not how can I say that? Um, um, in a way, not killing your consumers is a way, or preserving your consumers is a way of having a sustainable business. So it's important that these companies think about that and start to, by themselves, to offer healthy foods as well. So it's a complex relationship between regulatory bodies, industry, and consumers. I don't know if that really answers your question, Sibel, but I'll try my best.
Right, thank you. Andrea Seixas, it's up to you, your question. Andrea, I cannot listen to you. Your microphone is open.
Good afternoon.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon.
My name is Andrea, and I am a researcher head on unconventional food plants. I am curious to know what is this movement is like in Canada. Why people join this movement?
So you're asking about the what kind of movement was it? Sorry, I didn't get it.
Unconventional food plants.
Okay. So did you say unconventional?
Yes.
Yes. And what? So what do you call? What is it? Unconventional food plants. I'm not familiar with the terms. So what is it that you?
I can give some support. What they call unconventional is not usual. We have in Brazil several kind of plants that are eaten for some small communities, but it's not commonly used by other people. And they call that pank, and that kind of plants, because they are not usual, they're starting to offer to other parts of Brazil as a kind of new food in the terms that is not conventionally used or broadly used in the country. And that's it. It's very restricted to some specific groups. And yes. I think she wants to know if she has something like that in Canada.
Thank you. Thank you for the question and for the clarification. Is there something like that in Canada? It's a little bit difficult to answer that because in some respects, Canada is very much like the United States. Some people would even say that Canada is the 51st state of the United States. It's just a north of the border, and that kind of things. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily resonate. Although I would say, okay, there can be something. So I would say my experience. So I probably didn't tell you, but I'm French, and so I was born and raised in France. I lived for 5 years in the States, then 3 years in England, then it's been almost 6 years in Canada. So I've been living in these different cultures, and what I've seen is the North American culture in America and in Canada uh, the consumption of food very much driven by function. When I arrived in the States, Greek yogurt was booming because people were saying it's a great source of proteins. So, as a great source of proteins, people were rushing onto Greek yogurt. And now people are rushing on to stevia, for example, because it's a natural sweetener that doesn't have the calories of sugar. So I would say that to some extent, yes, people would turn to unconventional foods when they recognize it has some function that would be beneficial to them. But it's not, I would say, that's my perception of the North American society. In France, where I was born and grew up, it's probably different. There's something that is very much about the pleasure from the food. And so whatever new food, unconventional or whatever, that would come and bring something that is new pleasure, new flavor, something, but that still works in the French culture, then that would be adopted. So to answer your question, yes, to some extent, some unconventional food can emerge on the Canadian market, on the French market, on the American market, but only when they resonate with the consumers. If that unconventional food brings something that the consumers want, so a function, for example, a physical function, or a pleasure function, or maybe a safety function or calorie function, whatever. But when it's always about an offering meeting a demand. If you bring a new food, a novel food that feels that fills a need that consumers have, then it's likely to work. So there's yeah, just an example to illustrate that. There's a lot of research that's being done now in Canada about the diets of First Nations in Canada. People were living in Canada before Europeans arrived, and now researchers rediscover many of the health benefits of these diets, rich in berries, which are rich in polyphenols and bioactive compounds, and all that comes back to consumers, and they hear that and they say, oh, the First Nations, they were eating this, they were eating that, and they were healthy, so maybe we should do that as well. And so this is where unconventional foods can meet consumers, but once again, it happens only if that meets a demand. Consumers, for example, wanting a healthy food or wanting a specific function. You see, it has to fulfill a demand from the consumers. Otherwise, if your new food, unconventional food, doesn't bring anything that consumers want, or if it brings something that consumers don't want, well, it's unlikely to work. It's always that mutual relationship between what is offered and what is expected. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Juliana Leite, your question. Juliana, are you listening to us? Juliana, your question. You have to open your microphone.
Oh, I think she has written it in the chat.
Okay, I didn't realize.
So the question was, in terms of health benefits, can the clean label product be less healthy than a conventional or organic and natural product? In some cases, I would say yes. Again, natural could be poisonous because some poisons are very, very natural. Organic just means that there was no fertilizer or no pesticide. So if you think about that, clean label or organic or natural, it covers something that is reassuring for consumers. Natural means nothing artificial. Fine. Organic means no fertilizer, no pesticides. Fine. But they are not the same, right? So there are gaps in between. And there, what I try to show you are these gaps. If, for example, you've got acrylamide that is produced during the food processing, well, your food can be organic and natural. It will still remain to some extent toxic because there is acrylamide. If the factory in which you work handles food badly and there are microbial contaminations, it will be dangerous. It will be even more dangerous that there is no preservatives in the food, right? So all that to tell you that there are gaps. Organic, natural, clean label don't cover all the gaps. They do something that is not bad. Saying organic, no fertilizer, no pesticide is fine, but it doesn't make the whole food healthy. If it's handled, as I was saying, if it's handled badly at the factory, then E. coli or salmonella, you will probably be sick from organic E. coli or salmonella, right? So it's not because it's organic that it's safe.
Right. Thank you. Beatrice, your question?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for your presence. Is it interesting for the food industry to have informed people, or will the use of more complex terms be strategies to not decrease sales?
Thank you for the question. This is what I was actually trying to tell you with one of the, sorry, I'm checking my different screens, but that's what I was trying to tell you with this point here. To share or not to share. What kind of information can be shared? Some people would say, ideally, the industry should be transparent and say how they make the food, how they make it, what kind of ingredients, and all that kind of things, and be fully transparent. But I see two problems with that. The first problem is it's a lot of technical knowledge that who will understand that? You as a food scientist may understand a big part of it, but probably not everything. So think about people who never studied food science. What will they understand of that? Not a lot, and that leaves room for misinterpretation, misinformation. And so how useful is that transparency? It's difficult to say. It can backfire and be harmful in the end. So that would be one problem. The second problem would be that just like any kind of business, any kind of market, the food industry, the food market, the food business is competitive. And when I am Nestle or PepsiCo or Bimbo Bread or whatever, I have competitors. And if for reasons of safety or trust with consumers, I have to be fully transparent and give away all the information about what I do, then it means that I give all my information to my competitors as well. And that is not sustainable for a business. You cannot give all your information to your competitors. So once again, it's a dilemma. Consumers would like transparency, would like information, but on the other hand, if you give them the information first, who can be sure that they would understand it and make good use of it? And it will give information to your competitors. So it kills the competition and your possible advantage. So transparency to some extent, yes, that's important, but it cannot be full transparency. But when it's not full transparency, then it means that there are some things that you don't disclose. And if there are things that you don't disclose, then consumers would come and say to you, why don't you show that? So there's a problem of trust again. So it's a never-ending problem. Where should transparency stop? That is not solvable. There's no solution for that. It's just about being able to establish trust on the long run with the consumers. But it's something that you build over the years, and that can be destroyed quite quickly if you have a problem with your products. So once again, I feel like this is probably the 100th time I say that. I'm sorry, I've got no definitive answer. I can just tell you, well, this is precisely the issue. This is the issue of clean label, because it can mean everything or can mean anything or nothing at the same time. So it's difficult to handle it, and transparency is not particularly a good solution because of what I told you. So once again, it's more questions than answers, but I hope that gives you some elements to think about.
Right, that's it. That science has not to be precisely everything. Yeah. I think we have one more question about Rafael. Rafael, are you there? He was a few seconds ago. Let me see, Lorena.
I see Rafael has appeared on the screen.
Okay. Rafael, your question, please. Don't worry about your son in the background. That everybody has son. I have two of mine, and I'm worried that they not invade my office yet. That's
yeah. You see, the reason I have these headphones is because I've got 3 kids, and I'm afraid I couldn't hear you if they start screaming. So, yeah, don't worry about that. We're all in the same situation. All right, go ahead.
That's great. Rafael, your question.
Congratulations to Professor Nicolas. Is there demand for increased production of fish products in Canada? What technology should be developed?
Oh, sorry, I'm not sure I heard the question completely.
Is there demand for increased production of fish products in Canada?
Yeah.
What technology should be developed?
So I'm not exactly sure where you want to go with that question. So you're talking about the fish industry, right?
Yes.
Yes. So I'm not.
It's just very broad question, Rafael. Could you be more specific? Because well, it's a lot of things to be developed. Rafael, pode ser um pouco mais específico, porque é uma pergunta muito ampla essa.
Se existe alguma tendência para peixes ou camarões, por exemplo. Fishing and crustaceans.
I think, Rafael, it's a very broad question, but what's the tendency about fish and shrimps in Canada? I understand as a new food, or I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I would say I'm sorry. I don't think I've got the right knowledge to answer that question. First, I don't work personally on fish and fish products, and also how can I say that the nature of the food business from one side of Canada to the other, and it's a huge country, probably comparable to Brazil to some extent in terms of size, and so it's difficult to assess how is the fish industry on one coast, on the Atlantic coast, and how is the fish industry on the Pacific coast, due to the size of the country and the different economic environment. Plus, there are Canada has a lot of natural resources, and fish is one of them. And so Canada is engaged in commercial relationship with the States, engaged in commercial relationship with Europe as well. So things are moving constantly, and it's a bit difficult. It's not my specialty, and I wouldn't dare to give you answers on that. I'm sorry about that. I cannot be really specific. The only answers I can give you is that it's something a bit difficult to assess. And on top of it, it's not something I work on. It's not something I have knowledge on. So I'm sorry, I cannot really answer that question.
Right. It's okay. Thank you. Thank you. Kelly, what's your question? Kelly?
Okay, it's written in the chat.
Okay. You're right.
So the question is, with regard to production of new natural organic foods with great nutritional potential. So apparently that's Kelly's master's project. The aim of her research is to develop an unconventional plant-based protein supplement. I would like to know if it's already marketed in Canada, or if there's research for this type of herbal supplement. That is something, and so I think that goes back to, I don't remember whose question it was. I think it was Andrea's question about, or maybe it was Agnes' question. Sorry, I don't remember exactly whose question it was, but it was about meeting consumers' demand. And yes, in North America in general, there is a huge demand for protein supplements. But consumers being more and more aware of the environmental impact of animal proteins, then that creates a huge space for plant-based proteins. So there is a lot of demand. There are a lot of companies working on that to fulfill that demand, and I think what we're seeing is just the infancy of that, because right now we've got companies making plant proteins extracts, but it's only the beginning, and it will. I think it will change. I remember meeting with a researcher from Wageningen in the Netherlands, working on that. What I've showed you with, what was it? It was here. Beyond Burger and, the ultra processed, ultra formulated, plant-based protein foods. The problem, that list of ingredients is a problem for these consumers. So it creates an opportunity for a lot of businesses to create protein extracts from plants, but that will not require that kind of processing or that kind of formulation. And that researcher in the Netherlands was working on that. So yes, I think that it's something that happens in Canada. It happens also in the States. It happens probably everywhere in Europe. I can hear that happens in Brazil as well. So yes, there is research on that kind of things. And why is there research on that? Because there is demand for sources of proteins that are environmentally conscious, I would say, and that overcome the problems with current offerings, the problems about ultra formulation, for example. Does that answer your question, Kelly? All right.
Yeah, that's great. I think Agnes has another question, but before that, I just have to tell that we have just a couple of minutes before finish the course and at our section. Then be a quick question. And I have one more, and then we'll finish for today and to close our moment and our event. Agnes, please go on.
Okay, I want to make a comment and a question. I was thinking about maybe food education should be an elementary or in high school subject for people to choose their food better and have autonomy. And my question is, can the regulatory bodies compel companies to report acrylamine, BPAs, or any toxic compounds that could be processed in food?
That is, again, a very complex problem. So, yes, there are, for example, so when I was working at PepsiCo, and PepsiCo is making the, I don't know if you know the chips Lay's, the brand of Lay's chips. Well, so PepsiCo is a big manufacturer of chips, and before there was any regulation, PepsiCo was already controlling acrylamide because PepsiCo knew that it was an issue, not only for health but also in terms of perception. So, yes, when there is novel knowledge on that kind of things, like acrylamide, for example, yes, it's in the interest of companies to be proactive and do something about that. Sometimes it's a huge technical challenge. I would just take that example of acrylamide. For example, acrylamide is formed through the Maillard reaction. So I'm talking to food scientists. Are you all right with the Maillard reaction between amino acids and reducing sugars with heat? Yes. And acrylamide, in particular, is formed with the amino acid asparagine. And bad luck, potatoes are very rich in asparagine. So when you fry potatoes, they will make acrylamide almost right away. And to reduce acrylamide, so there are ways in terms of technology, which is reducing the heat of the frying, the time of the frying, but they also developed new breeds of potatoes with less asparagine so that it would create less acrylamide. So addressing that kind of challenge can be huge because you don't create a new breed of potatoes just like that overnight, right? It's very important. And now, if you take that problem of acrylamide, which is one single compound, now what can you do about all the compounds that are created during processing and that we don't know of yet, and that we don't know if they're toxic or not? Because what happens during food processing is thousands of chemical reactions at the same time, making products that are different from product to product, from processing to processing. And so it's very hard to know among these thousands of products that are created, which ones are dangerous, which ones are at actual levels that can be dangerous. So it all follows research, and researchers in institutes of universities doing research about, questioning, is that safe? Can we still go with that? It required initially people asking the question about acrylamide. Can that be a problem? Then before it was proven that it was a problem, and then industry could do something about that. But there's still thousands of other products are created during processing, and that we don't know about yet. And so it's a constantly evolving process. It's science. It changes all the time. So yes, to answer your question more specifically, yes, companies can do that. It's in the interest to do it and to mitigate that kind of product, but they can only do it on things that we know are dangerous, right? And everything that we don't know, well, we don't know what we don't know.
Yes, thank you.
That's great, very nice. Just one last question, then Professor Nicolas. You've been talking about at the beginning about cannabis, and it's a kind of curiosity. I have heard some colleagues from some places where cannabis has been used, that the population become a little bit apathetic. I don't know if you have that perception, because they are being used as a food. And I'd like to hear from you about magic mushrooms that has been kind of in the same way of cannabis, but more like a medical treatment as a microdose or things like that. Can I talk very short about that experience or perception about that?
So to be honest with you, I don't know really about the mushrooms, but I can tell you a bit about cannabis, and it's a very interesting situation because first, in Canada, Canada made cannabis legal as the plant to be sold as is, but it is still in the process of making a regulation for foods with cannabis, and it's not done yet. So it's a very paradoxical situation where there are companies making foods with cannabis, waiting for the regulation to allow them to commercialize it. But the regulation is still underway because it's too complex. For cannabis as the plant, as a recreational drug or or as a medication, it's quite easy to control the quality, control the amount or whatever. But when it comes to putting it into a food, then it's just like any other bioactive compound. The food matrix impacts the functionality, impacts the pharmacokinetics, which means the speed at which it goes into the blood and therefore into the brain. It impacts potential byproducts during processing. And there is so little research on cannabis in food that there's not enough knowledge yet to be able to say this type of food is safe, this type of food is not, and therefore there is a regulation. So Canada is in a very, I would say, interesting situation in the sense that now there's a lot of research being done, but there's not a lot of results yet. The food manufacturers are developing products to be ready to sell them whenever they can. And the regulation is waiting for the data to come and give information for, to be effective. So it's all moving pieces, and this is why it's appearing, it's underway, but it's not there yet completely. Does that answer your question?
Yes, good. Yes, we just like to see a perspective from a country that has legally is consuming that plant. Okay.
Yeah. And so sorry, I forgot one piece of your question about being apathetic. I've seen. So I was in Canada before the legalization, authorization of cannabis, and after, and students sleep in the classroom before and after, so it doesn't change anything.
It's the same.
No, I'm kidding, because they don't sleep. They don't sleep.
Right. It's the same as always. All right, then that's it. Professor Nicolas Bordenave, thank you very much for your presentation, for your lecture. It was very good to have you here, and that initiative of internationalization of the course of food science. And we are very grateful that you took time to prepare that and to share your information with all the students. And I'd like to let you final words if you have, and then we'll end session.
Well, I would like to thank you for the invitation. Thank you all, the students, for your interest, for the questions. It really showed that you are interested in this kind of topic. I hope the information I gave you was relevant and interesting enough. But in any case, thank you very much for listening to it. Thank you very much for reacting to it and asking questions. That's really great. I loved the experience. I also felt that it was interesting that the communication or the questions were relevant to different cultures, and that's an interesting part of the exercise as well. So if you liked it, then it makes me happy. I liked the exercise and I liked discussing with you, so that's great. Thank you very much again for the invitation.
Right, thank you very much. And I think it was very positive. Some students are asking if you have some possibility of collaborations and exchange of students at your university.
There are some opportunities. There are opportunities for funding as well, which is always, always the big question: how to fund, how to find the money to make the exchange happen. There is an organism in Canada, and I would probably redirect you to that, and I will write it in the chat. It's called MyTax, and I've written it just right now. That makes exchanges between Canada and other countries, and that funds some of the travel, some of the exchange, and some of the research. So I really encourage you to explore the possibilities there. And so, because the University of Ottawa works with MyTax, then through that, there's always a possibility to get funding, and therefore to get students through that. So please go ahead and have a look at that. And if you find something suitable, then, as I told you, yes, there is always a possibility.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's good to know about that. I'll put in the chat of WhatsApp chat of the group to they search about that. And they are aware as well that there is CAPS and CNPq, CNPq in Portuguese, that they fund, and they already are a good source to send students abroad. It's a possibility, and sometimes the money is short, then it's good to know that has some support in Brazil and in Canada at the same time. Maybe you can join force and have a good stay in another country, another university.
Yes, exactly.
That's good to know. Thank you very much again, Nicolas Bordenave, for your time and for a brilliant presentation. And we end our session here, and we'll see you continue with the food science with next week with another lecture. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you very much all, and have a good day.